Imagine the year 1493. A fleet of 17 Spanish ships looms on the horizon of a lush Caribbean island. Christopher Columbus, fresh from his famed 1492 voyage, stands at the bow. He is returning to the island of Hispaniola, determined to establish Spain's first foothold in the New World. The era of discovery is about to give birth to an era of colonies. Columbus's second voyage brought over 1,000 colonists to Hispaniola with grand ambitions. In late 1493, he founded La Isabela on the island's north coast, the first European settlement in the Americas. Named after Queen Isabella of Castile, this embryonic colony had a fortified storehouse, a church, the admiral's own house, and other rudimentary structures. Columbus chose the site for its natural defenses, envisioning it as Spain's tropical outpost for conquest and conversion. However, La Isabela was ill-fated from the start. The ground was marshy and mosquitoes swarmed all around. By the end of 1494, hunger and tropical disease devastated the settlers. Nearly two-thirds of the Spaniards perished within the first year. Food supplies ran low, and attempts at farming faltered in the unfamiliar climate. Relationships with the native Taíno people also deteriorated. Some Spaniards abused Columbus's absence by looting villages and kidnapping indigenous people. Taíno caciques retaliated, and warfare erupted. Columbus returned from exploring to find his fledgling colony in chaos. He waged war on resisting Taíno groups, demanding tribute in gold or cotton, and brutally suppressing uprisings. This harsh regime included forced labor and even the shipment of hundreds of islanders to Spain as enslaved people. La Isabela, once a symbol of hope, was racked by misery and conflict within just a few years. At Columbus's direction, a new settlement was established farther south, on the banks of the Ozama River. Columbus's brother Bartholomew Columbus led the founding of Santo Domingo that year. The site offered a better harbor and fertile land, and it soon replaced La Isabela as the colony's capital. Santo Domingo would earn fame as the first permanent European city in the Americas. Within a decade, it boasted the hemisphere's first cathedral, hospital, customs house, and university. Its streets were laid out in a grid pattern, a model that many New World towns would later emulate. In 1502, a powerful hurricane struck Hispaniola and leveled much of the nascent Santo Domingo. The new governor, Nicolás de Ovando, had just arrived with 2,500 fresh settlers and supplies. Seizing the moment to improve the city's layout, Ovando relocated Santo Domingo across to the west bank of the Ozama River, where the ground was higher. He rebuilt the town with a spacious central plaza and a fortified city plan. The revamped Santo Domingo featured solid stone architecture and a stout defense, ready to anchor Spain's empire. This resilience paid off. From 1502 onward, Santo Domingo endured and prospered, while earlier settlements like La Isabela faded to ruins. Even as Santo Domingo took root, Columbus's personal fortunes were unraveling. He had been appointed viceroy and governor of the new territories, but numerous disputes arose between Columbus and his brothers, as well as the Spanish colonists. Promised riches had not materialized, and Columbus's rule grew harsh. Reports of his mismanagement and brutal punishments reached Spain. By 1497 to 1498, some Spaniards in Hispaniola openly revolted against Columbus's authority over issues like food rations and gold sharing. Columbus put down one such rebellion by hanging a ringleader and reasserting control. Concerned by the turmoil, the Spanish crown dispatched a royal commissioner, Francisco de Bobadilla, to investigate the situation. Bobadilla arrived in Santo Domingo in 1500, while Columbus was away, and heard numerous grievances. He lost no time. Bobadilla seized Columbus's property and offices and declared himself the new governor. Columbus and his brothers were arrested upon their return to Spain. Columbus spent weeks languishing in a Spanish jail until King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella ordered his release. Though the monarchs stripped Columbus of his governorship, they did allow him one final voyage. But effective power in Hispaniola had passed to others, first Bobadilla and soon Nicolás de Ovando, whom the crown appointed as the new permanent governor. In a twist of fate, Columbus himself was briefly locked in the very colony he founded. The age of Columbus was ending. The age of the conquistadors was dawning. Governor Ovando arrived at Santo Domingo in 1502, ushering in a more systematized colonial regime. Under his iron-fisted administration, the Spanish settlement expanded and was fortified. Ovando supervised the construction of sturdy buildings and defenses, including the massive Ozama fortress, which guarded the port. Yet Ovando's legacy is stained with some of the darkest chapters of early colonial history, particularly in his treatment of the native Taíno people. By the time Ovando took charge, the Taíno population had already significantly suffered from diseases and exploitation, but they had not given up resistance. Ovando moved swiftly to crush any opposition. In 1503, he turned his attention to the powerful Taíno region of Jaragua in western Hispaniola. The local Taíno queen Anacaona, a renowned cacica celebrated for her diplomacy and poetry, welcomed Ovando with a ceremonial feast, hoping for peace. But Ovando chose betrayal. Fearing a conspiracy, he lured dozens of Taíno caciques into a large thatched hall under the pretense of a friendly gathering. At his signal, Spanish soldiers barred the doors and set the structure ablaze, killing dozens of leaders in an instant. Horsemen cut down those who fled. This brutal massacre decapitated the Taíno leadership. Anacaona herself was spared from the fire, only to face a grim fate. Ovando had her bound in chains and carried to Santo Domingo, where, after months of imprisonment and abuse, the 30-year-old queen was publicly hanged in 1504. Spanish chroniclers later wrote that Anacaona was executed essentially to show who ruled. In the wake of this atrocity, organized Taíno resistance on Hispaniola was effectively crushed. Ovando then enforced a regime of encomiendas and forced mine labor that led to the near annihilation of the island's indigenous population in the years to come. With Hispaniola subdued and Santo Domingo thriving, the Spanish turned their eyes to new horizons. Santo Domingo soon became the jumping-off point for the conquest of other lands in the Americas. Ambitious conquistadors gathered in its plazas to plan their expeditions. From Santo Domingo's port, ships set sail carrying men who would make history. Juan Ponce de León departed to colonize Puerto Rico and later explore Florida. Diego Velázquez launched the campaign to conquer Cuba in 1511. Hernán Cortés resided in Hispaniola and later Cuba before voyaging to overthrow the Aztec Empire in Mexico. In 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, after living in Hispaniola, would trek across the Isthmus of Panama to behold the Pacific Ocean. Santo Domingo was the headquarters of Spain's West Indies Dominion, the launchpad for the Spanish conquest of the Caribbean and beyond. It was the administrative and logistical center where new expeditions were outfitted, strategies debated, and the riches of the Americas first flowed into Europe. Built between 1502 and 1508 at the order of Governor Ovando, Fortaleza Ozama is the oldest European fortress in the Americas. The fortress defended Santo Domingo's harbor from pirates and rival empires for centuries. Inside its dungeons, one can still imagine the clank of shackles. Columbus himself was confined here briefly as a prisoner in 1500. Today, the Ozama fort stands proudly as part of Santo Domingo's UNESCO-recognized colonial city, its medieval-style battlements overlooking the river as a tangible link to the colony's turbulent birth. On a bluff above the Ozama, the Alcázar de Colón was built from 1510 to 1514 as the opulent palace of Diego Columbus, Christopher's eldest son and the colony's viceroy. Within its 55 rooms, history was made. The palace's loggias and halls hosted strategy sessions by conquistadors like Cortés, Velázquez, and Balboa as they plotted the invasions of Mexico, Cuba, Panama, and Peru. From the lonely watchtower of Fort Ozama to the stately rooms of the Alcázar, Santo Domingo is a living monument to the triumphs and tragedies of the first colony in the Americas. Here, Columbus's bold voyages transformed into permanent settlement. Here, the clash of Spanish ambition and indigenous resistance unfolded. And from here, a wave of conquest spread to reshape two entire continents. Over 5 centuries later, the cobblestone streets and weathered stone facades of Santo Domingo's colonial city whisper tales of adventure, conflict, and legacy, the very dawn of the conquest of the Americas.